Whaley House stands majestically in Old Town San Diego, its building resembling a museum showcasing ancient architecture with beautiful details from the mid-19th century. However, anyone who has ever stared too long at the second-floor window at night would say the same thing. There is something there that should not belong to this world. In the fall of 2022, a history student named Danielle Turner, 24 years old, came to San Diego to research historic places. She was intrigued by Whaley House, a house that, according to the Travel Channel, is one of the most haunted houses in America. Danielle was not the type to easily believe ghost stories, but she enjoyed mysteries and the dark history attached to the old house. Thomas Whaley built this house on the site of a former public execution, land where James "Yankee Jim" Robinson was hanged to death in 1852. Danielle read that Whaley witnessed Yankee Jim's execution firsthand. Several years later, he bought the land and built a grand house on it, thinking he could change the fate of the place. But from the beginning, the house was never free from tragedy. The Whaley children died young. There were fires, mysterious footsteps, and screams without any source. Many believed the land refused to be forgotten. When Danielle first set foot in front of the house, a chill crept up her neck, even though the San Diego sun was still shining warmly. Her gaze was drawn to the small window upstairs. She swore she saw a white shadow like mist moving slowly behind the swaying curtains. But when she blinked, everything was empty. The house stared back at her, silent and untouched. She smiled softly, laughing at her own feelings, then entered to join the tour. The night tour guide was a middle-aged man named Larry. He wore an old black suit and spoke with a calm but deep voice, like reciting a long-memorized poem. Danielle listened eagerly as Larry told stories about the courtroom that once served as a trial place, about the dining room that had seen births and deaths. Everything felt historical but cold. When they stood on the spiral staircase going upstairs, Danielle felt something strange, like there was a weight in the air. She looked at each step one by one, and for a moment she felt like someone was standing above, looking down. After the tour ended, Danielle stepped outside and stood in the yard. Night had fallen and the sky was filled with clouds. She took out her phone to take one last photo of the upstairs window. This time the white shadow was clearer, like the figure of a woman in a long dress. But when she showed the photo to a tour staff member, the man went pale. "There's no one upstairs right now," he said. "The tour is closed. All the participants are still here." Danielle looked at the photo again. And for the first time since arriving in San Diego, that chill no longer felt like the weather. It felt like a warning. The interior of Whaley House looked clean and tidy, as if untouched by time. Yet, behind the gleam of the old wooden floors and the neat arrangement of antique furniture, there hung an invisible atmosphere, like a long sigh from the unfinished past. Danielle followed the night tour group with the guide named Karen, a middle-aged woman with a soft but experienced voice. Her gaze was calm, but her eyes seemed to hold secrets she would never reveal in words. "If you smell old tobacco," Karen said softly as the group began entering the living room, "don't worry. That's just Mr. Whaley checking on us." Some visitors chuckled lightly, trying to stay rational. Danielle herself smiled faintly, but in her heart, she started feeling something had changed since the window incident earlier. They walked slowly to the family room, a spacious room with a worn sofa, an old piano, and a large 19th century mirror hanging on the wall. In the corner stood a wooden rocking chair with a faded cushion, said to be Anna Whaley's favorite seat, Thomas's wife. As Karen began explaining the room's history, Danielle felt the temperature drop drastically. Not like the night breeze or air conditioning, this felt more like her body was touched by something without temperature. Her instincts made her hair stand on end. And then the sound came. Soft, steady. The sound of hard-soled footsteps from upstairs. The steps seemed to walk along the wooden corridor above them, then stop right above Danielle's head. Everyone looked up. Karen fell silent. She slowly glanced toward the ceiling. "There's no staff upstairs right now," she said, trying to sound calm. "But this isn't the first time we've heard footsteps like that." Suddenly, from the corner of the room, the old rocking chair began to move. Slowly. The rocking was steady, as if someone unseen was sitting there. A young man from the group leaned his face toward the chair, but before he could touch the backrest, a deep voice came from the old mirror. A long groan, like a whisper drawn from the depths of a chest. Danielle, standing closest to the mirror, turned. And inside that mirror, she saw something that should not be there. The reflection of an old woman in a white lace dress, her face pale like wax, standing behind the group, though when she turned around there was no one there. Danielle bit her lip, holding her breath. Slowly she looked back at the mirror. The figure was still there. But this time, the woman's head began to turn, staring directly at Danielle. "All right, let's move on to the kitchen." Karen's voice broke the tension, but Danielle remained frozen. She glanced at Karen, then back at the mirror once more, and the figure vanished. She stepped forward with trembling legs, following the group, but her heart knew. She had opened a door that should have stayed closed. From that moment, Whaley House was no longer just a historic building in the records. For Danielle, the house had become the starting point of something far deeper and darker. And those footsteps from above earlier? They were not memories. They were a greeting. Night had fallen quietly over San Diego, but inside Danielle's mind, the image of the hanged man from her dream kept replaying. She woke up drenched in cold sweat, breathing heavily, a chill crawling down her spine despite the thick blanket wrapped around her. She remembered the man's face clearly, tall, with deep sunken dark eyes, mouth open as if about to scream or call out. The next morning, Danielle returned immediately to the Whaley house, her resolve stronger than ever to uncover the truth. No longer just a history student who liked mysteries, she now felt pulled by something deeper, a calling. At 3 in the afternoon, she was greeted by Miguel, a young staff member dressed casually with a lanyard that read "Guide in Training." Miguel was friendly but clearly looked tired, like someone who had seen too many inexplicable things. "To be honest," Miguel said while walking slowly through the corridors of the old house, "sometimes I think this house is never truly empty, even when we lock all the doors." Danielle took out her notebook, recording their conversation. Miguel led her to the back room that used to be a kitchen, then to a small hall now used for exhibiting Whaley family relics. In one corner of the hall, there was a narrow staircase leading upstairs. There Miguel stopped. "This is usually where everything starts to change," he whispered. "Whenever the footsteps sound, they almost always come from above. Heavy, slow, sometimes stopping right at the 7th step." Danielle glanced at the stairs. There was nothing there, but she could feel something, not just the cold air, but a small vibration in her chest, as if her body could detect something unseen. "I once did a night watch here 2 months ago," Miguel continued. "Around 1 in the morning, the footsteps started. I thought maybe the previous guard was still upstairs, so I went up." Miguel paused. "At the 7th step, my leg suddenly felt heavy, like something was holding it. I fell. But that's not what traumatized me." Danielle swallowed hard. "Then what?" "When I fell, I looked up. There was a shadow. Black, tall, standing at the end of the 2nd floor hallway. It didn't move, but I felt it bow slightly, as if watching me from above." A moment of silence. Danielle tried to lighten the mood. "Do you believe all this?" Miguel stared at her for a long moment. "I don't believe. I have seen." Danielle shivered even though the sun still shone through the windows. Miguel's words echoed in her mind. She nodded slowly. "I want to try tonight," she said. Miguel immediately shook his head. "Don't go upstairs. Especially alone. Especially past midnight. This isn't just a story. People have gotten lost on the upper floor. The only thing they remember is the sound of a rope being slowly pulled." Danielle smiled faintly, trying to stay skeptical. But her heart beat faster. She knew tonight she would come back. And deep inside, she also knew the footsteps were waiting. The night felt thick, as if time itself was reluctant to move. The sky over San Diego was heavy with clouds, obscuring the usually friendly moonlight. Danielle stood in front of the Whaley house, tightening her jacket, carrying a small bag filled with an infrared camera, a voice recorder, and a notebook. There was no doubt on her face, only sharp eyes full of curiosity, and a little, very little fear she wouldn't admit. Miguel waited inside, sitting on a wicker chair near the front door, like a night guard reluctant to really keep watch. 2 hours, he said, handing her the keys. "I'm not going any further than this. But if anything weird happens, run, okay? Don't act brave." Danielle nodded. She entered the main room, turned on the recorder, and placed it on the round wooden table. She sat in one of the old chairs in the living room, facing the rocking chair that no longer rocked. The air felt heavy, silent, but not an ordinary silence. This was silence full of meaning. The first faint sound came from the recorder, a soft hiss, like a breath drawn too close to the microphone. Danielle stared at the device, then slowly looked around. No one was there. Minutes passed. Then footsteps sounded. Slow, heavy, steady. Tuk tuk tuk. Danielle looked up. The stairs in front of her appeared empty, but the sound remained, like someone or something was walking upstairs. She squinted toward the first step, turned on her flashlight, and shone it. No shadow, no movement, but the footsteps still echoed. Tuk tuk tuk. Each step seemed to resonate off the walls of the old house, and a cold chill began to crawl up Danielle's neck. The recorder now picked up the creaking of wood, like an old door slowly opening. Creak. Danielle stood, her body tense. She glanced at Miguel, who now seemed asleep in the chair, his head tilted with one arm hanging down. Danielle wanted to wake him, but the footsteps, now getting closer to the top of the stairs, rooted her in place. She knew the sound came from upstairs. Suddenly, from the distance above, another sound was heard. A sound that made her blood freeze. Crying. The voice of a child. Soft, sobbing, gentle, heartbreaking. Danielle covered her mouth. The crying was not like ordinary tears. Not from a spoiled or frightened child, but the cry of a small soul that was lonely or trapped. "Hello," she called softly. No answer. Only sobbing that slowly faded, replaced by a silence far more terrifying. At that moment, Danielle felt something standing behind her. She didn't hear footsteps, didn't smell anything, but she knew something was there. Slowly she turned around. Empty. Yet, the flashlight in her hand suddenly flickered and went out. Her recorder hissed louder. Danielle gripped it tightly, her body trembling. She knew she had to decide now, retreat to Miguel and leave, or go upstairs. The stairs now seemed to challenge, or invite. Small footsteps began again above, this time like a child running softly. Then a light thud like a small ball dropping. With her heart pounding fiercely, Danielle placed one foot on the first step. The world upstairs was waiting. Danielle's steps were heavy as her right foot touched the first stair. The floorboards creaked softly beneath her shoe sole, as if complaining about her presence. Even though the flashlight in her hand had gone out, she continued climbing with a faint light filtering in from the back window, carrying the city's glow. Second stair, third, fourth. Her own sounds, her breath, heartbeat, and footsteps were unnervingly clear. The stairs seemed to hold echoes of the past. At the fifth stair, Danielle stopped. The air above felt much colder. Not an ordinary cold, but the kind of chill found in a basement long locked away. She wiped the cold sweat from the back of her neck and stepped forward again. Sixth stair. Faintly she caught a scent. Not tobacco as Karen had mentioned yesterday, but something sharper, like rusty iron mixed with damp earth. She recognized the smell, old blood. Seventh stair. Danielle's steps froze. Her body stiffened. Her toes refused to step onto the eighth stair. There was a pressure as if someone stood exactly on that step, blocking her way though invisible. The air thickened. "You see me?" The voice came out of nowhere. Soft. Very close. Right by her left ear. Danielle screamed, staggering down 2 stairs. She looked back, breathless, but the stairs below were empty. Miguel was still asleep downstairs, completely undisturbed. The child's voice returned from upstairs. This time it wasn't crying, but singing. "Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies." A creepy childish tune floated down clearly from above. Danielle squinted at the top of the stairs, and then something appeared. A small shadow. Like a little girl with long hair wearing a faded white dress, standing at the top, her back to Danielle. Her shoulders swayed gently as if silently laughing. Danielle shivered. "Who are you?" The child slowly turned. Her face was broken, half blackened, and her right eye was hollow. Danielle was frozen. But the child only stared at her, then turned and walked away into the upstairs hallway. Danielle clutched her chest. Fear wrapped around her body, but so did burning curiosity. What really happened in this house? And why did the child seem to know her? Danielle stood at the top of the stairs, her body still trembling. She turned the flashlight back on. It had mysteriously lit up without issue. The beam moved slowly, revealing a narrow hallway with old wooden floors stretching toward the Whaley House bedrooms. The hallway was not dusty. In fact, it felt too clean, too tidy for an old, uninhabited house. Danielle stepped forward cautiously. The wall on her left was lined with family portraits, Thomas, Anna, and their 6 children. But there was one painting that looked new, as if untouched by time. Danielle approached it, examining closely. The face of a man, tall with dark eyes and a faint smile. James Yankee Jim Robinson. Danielle took a step back. She never knew this man's portrait was in the upstairs hall. Historical records only mentioned his execution before the house was built. Suddenly, at the end of the hallway, a bedroom door slowly creaked open, on its own. The hinges groaned like an old regretful sigh. Danielle took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was an old bedroom. A large wooden bed was still covered with yellowed white sheets. But what stood out most was a large mirror on the north wall. An antique gold-framed mirror, almost touching the ceiling. As Danielle gazed into it, the world shifted. She did not see herself. Instead, a family, Thomas Whaley sitting in a chair holding a letter, Anna standing by the bed holding a baby. Two small children ran around the room. They all looked alive, like a replay of the past from another world. Danielle stared, stunned. But as she touched the mirror's surface, everything changed. The shadows stopped moving. Then, they turned to face her. Their faces slowly changed. Empty eyes, bluish skin, mouths beginning to scream, silently. As if they saw something behind Danielle. She turned around, no one there. But when she looked back at the mirror, a figure now stood directly behind her reflection. James Yankee Jim. His body hung from the ceiling, a rope wrapped around his neck, and his face, staring straight into her eyes. The mirror cracked. A long line like a wound appeared across the glass. Then a whisper came from behind the mirror. "You shouldn't be here." Danielle stumbled backward, hitting the wall. She ran out of the room, breath ragged, cold sweat soaking her neck. Reaching the stairs, she screamed, "Miguel?" But there was no answer. And for the first time since she arrived, the house felt truly alive, and not in the way it should be. Danielle hurriedly descended the stairs, her breath ragged. Her entire body was drenched in cold sweat, as if she had just escaped the jaws of death. When she reached the main room, she searched for Miguel. But he was no longer in the front chair. As if he had vanished into thin air. "Miguel?" she called out, her voice hoarse. No answer. The house was silent, but not the usual silence. It was like a stillness waiting for something. Like the pause before a scream. Danielle stepped cautiously toward the back room, heading to the old kitchen. A cold chill greeted her as she passed through the doorway, and a faint sound, like chains being dragged, began to echo from the basement. She didn't recall seeing a basement on the building's blueprints she had looked at. But in the corner of the kitchen, behind an old shelf, she found something she hadn't noticed before. A small wooden door, half hidden by the furniture. And the door was slightly ajar. Danielle swallowed hard, then shone her flashlight through the dark crack behind the door. A staircase led down to a basement, thick with dust and cobwebs. But there was something more chilling, the strong smell of metal and damp earth. Like blood. She descended slowly, her footsteps echoing softly between the stone walls. When she reached the bottom, she saw it. A cramped room with a low ceiling, and in the center, a large wooden post stood upright with a noose hanging from it. An execution post. Danielle approached, staring at the rope with trembling hands. Below it was a dark stain on the stone floor. Something dried but still felt fresh. Suddenly, her flashlight went out. Pitch black. And the sound came, a hoarse scream, a man writhing in agony, and "Oh, don't," followed by the tightening of a rope. Danielle couldn't move. Her body was frozen. But her eyes, slowly adjusting to the dark, caught the figure. A tall man, hanging, slowly turning toward her. His neck was broken, but those eyes were still open. Then he opened his mouth and screamed. The scream didn't come through her ears. It pierced directly into Danielle's mind, making her curl up, covering her ears while screaming, but no sound came out of her own mouth. She didn't know how long she stayed there. But suddenly the flashlight flickered back on. The room was empty. The post still stood, but the rope was gone. And, on the back wall, she saw an old carving that she could only now read. "Who enters here, carries the curse." With trembling hands, Danielle climbed back up. But the house felt different now. Every step felt watched. Every breath of wind felt like a whisper. And from the old mirror in the living room, someone was watching her. Danielle's body trembled violently as she climbed back down the stairs to the ground floor. The house, which had once felt like a historical space, had now transformed into a living prison full of shadows and whispers. The screams of the man hanging in the basement still echoed in her mind, tightening her chest and sending her thoughts into a wild spiral. Once in the main room, Danielle tried to calm herself. Yet the cold air still bit into her skin, and the tobacco scent that she once thought was Thomas Whaley's presence, now turned into a pungent stench that stabbed her nose. She realized something in this house didn't want her to leave so easily. In the corner of the room, the rocking chair began to sway slowly. The white shadow from upstairs reappeared faintly in the antique mirror, staring sharply at her. Danielle knew she couldn't stay any longer. With quick steps, she headed for the front door, but the sound of heavy footsteps followed behind her, growing closer. Her heart pounded fiercely. She looked back. No one was there, just the empty dark hallway. Go, A soft whisper filled her ears, seeming to come from the walls and floor. The front door felt locked by an invisible force. Danielle pulled the door handle with all her strength. Her heart nearly stopped when the door slowly creaked open. She ran outside, gasping for breath, and the moment she stepped onto the sidewalk in front of the Whaley house, it felt like a heavy burden was lifted from her shoulders. The warm glow of the streetlights and the sounds of San Diego's night welcomed her, bringing her back to reality. But before she could truly get away, a white shadow flashed quickly past the second-floor window of the house, staring at her with empty eyes full of vengeance. Danielle knew one thing for sure: the Whaley house would never let her go that easily. She promised herself she would never return, at least not anytime soon. But there was a deep feeling waiting to be uncovered. A mystery far darker than she had ever imagined. The Whaley house was not just an old house. It was a doorway to something darker, something waiting for anyone brave enough to step inside. After running out of the Whaley house, Danielle stood on the sidewalk in front, her chest still heaving. She turned her gaze back to the old building. From a distance, the house appeared calm, with dim lights emitting a warm aura, as if inviting anyone to come inside, though the reality was far different. That night, Danielle took a camera out of her bag and began recording the house from the outside. She wanted to capture the atmosphere and perhaps, instinctively, catch something unseen by ordinary eyes. The streetlights cast long shadows on the old brick walls, and the night wind rustled the dry leaves around the yard. At the second-floor window, she looked toward the white curtains that were gently swaying. Behind the curtains, faintly, she saw a blurry figure familiar to her, like the shadow of a woman in white she had once seen in the family room mirror. The figure stared directly at her, expressionless, only an emptiness that pierced through. Danielle held her breath. The atmosphere turned bone-chilling cold. Something was wrong, something she couldn't explain with logic. Suddenly, a small shadow darted quickly across the front yard, as if running from one side to the other. The shadow resembled a child, laughing softly and floating without touching the ground. "This is not just about history," Danielle whispered in her heart. "It's about trapped souls." She knew that from the outside, the house looked harmless, but anyone watching it would feel the heavy burden of a past that still lingered. At the same moment, a soft whisper sounded in her ear, like a voice coming from inside the house. "Don't leave, stay." And Danielle knew her experience with the Whaley house was just beginning. The next morning, Danielle left San Diego with a mix of emotions. She sat in the car on the way to the airport, her eyes constantly glancing at the phone screen filled with recordings and photos of the Whaley house. But something felt different, an invisible weight pressing on her mind. When she arrived at her small rented house, she began to feel an overwhelming fatigue. Her head throbbed, her vision blurred, and a chill lingered despite the warm air in her room. More disturbing, the faint shadows she had seen in that house began to appear in her dreams and even when she was awake. Every time she closed her eyes, the figure of the woman in white and the laughing child echoed in her mind. Soft whispering voices kept haunting her, blurring reality and making it difficult to sleep. Danielle's thoughts started to waver. She wondered if what she experienced was merely hallucinations, or if she truly carried something dark from the Whaley house with her. Finally, with a heavy heart, she made an appointment to see a psychologist. She knew she needed help, not only for her mental health but also to understand what was really happening. During the first therapy session, Danielle struggled to explain her feelings and visions without sounding insane. However, the psychologist patiently listened, giving her space to unravel every layer of fear and anxiety. "Sometimes trauma doesn't always come from our personal past," the psychologist said at one point. "There are experiences that can leave marks on the mind and soul, even if they come from something unseen." Danielle nodded slowly, realizing that what she had gone through was more than just an ordinary ghost story. There was something deeper and binding, something unfinished. Outside the window, rain fell gently, adding to the gloomy atmosphere that seemed to mourn the burden Danielle carried. The Whaley house might be far away in San Diego, but its shadows and secrets were now attached to her life, following her steps, lurking silently, waiting for the right time to resurface.